Welcome back to Brown Girls Money Moves, where we hear from South Asian women founders and the investors backing them. I'm your host, Bhargavi Varma. What if the things that you've been obsessed with since you were 9 years old turned out to be the basis for a $1 million business idea? Well, that's what happened to Zehra Naqvi, founder of Lore, the AI-powered fandom search platform that already has hundreds of thousands of people on its waitlist. We're also joined by Marina Girgis of Precursor Ventures, one of their earliest believers and a pre-seed investor who went from covering semiconductor stocks to backing some of the most exciting first-time founders in the game. We got into why obsession is an underrated investment thesis, what it actually takes to pitch a VC when you have nothing but an idea and a really good memo, and how two women with anything but conventional paths found their way to the cutting edge of consumer AI. I hope you enjoy. Zehra, Marina, thank you for joining us on Brown Girls Money Moves. I am happy to be in what, in my head, I think of as Zehra's stomping grounds, because this is truly, and I say that as no joke when we get into talking about all the things that you accomplished before starting Lore. But let's start with the good news, and let's start with the exciting stuff. Lore is having a moment. I don't think I'm making this up to say like 100,000 person waitlist, I believe would qualify as momentum. So congratulations. And how does it feel? Like, how does it feel to, put something out into the world and have 100,000 people
crazy.
Interested?
I think like when I started the company, my whole focus was like, can I prove that there are other people who are dealing with the same problem I've dealt with? Not something that even just like came into fruition when I was in my 20s, but really something that I've been doing since I was 9 years old. So I think it was incredibly validating. And we're now actually at 200,000 since it's been like a year of us like in stealth kind of growing and working on different little activations. So it's crazy, but it's amazing. I think it just validates the problem that we're solving, because so much of the original base was like just posting TikToks about this problem and then seeing if anyone resonated. And that was before we even really told people what our solution was. And I think it's just like indicative of how sorely something was needed in this ecosystem.
So when that already kind of sets up the stage for the question that we start every interview with, because it's almost always relatable. Imagine that you're at a family function and an auntie comes up to you and says something that is so completely off color and unwarranted, and says something like, maybe, I heard that you're working on something and that it is about entertaining people. Like, is that going to pay the bills? And I hear it's called Lore. What is that? How would you explain that to auntie?
Well, I always start with whatever it is that they are obsessed with and what they're spending most of their time on. And I think like for me, when I think about the aunties that come up to me, it's typically like Pakistani soap operas or the Turkish dramas that everyone is obsessed with. And so I kind of start there and say like, after you watch an episode of that soap drama and then you immediately want to go into like the Facebook groups, the Reddit threads, the Twitter threads, into the corners of the internet that most aunties are afraid of, but they're willing to go into them because they're so obsessed with this TV show and this drama. That's essentially what Lore is building. We're trying to build a better platform for like the secondary and tertiary conversations that happen after you consume the primary source of media that you're obsessed with, wanting to predict what's going to happen in the next episode, who's going to die, what are the theories that exist online. And so Lore really just becomes like your one-stop shop to read all of those theories in one place. And I mean, that's kind of how I would explain it. And that's also not even auntie specific. I think for everyone and anyone, regardless of like age, demographic, I always start with like, what are you obsessed with? And then I use that to contextualize what it is that we're building.
I think somewhere in there is a nugget for all founders and how they tell their story about what they're building, because there's so many people building in spaces that aren't they're behind the scenes. They're things that the customer will never see, especially if it's B2B. So founders listening, take note. I love the way you describe that. Marina, you have been at Precursor Ventures with Charles, who, by the way, he was on the podcast last season with Amrita Saigal of Kudos. And you've been with Precursor for several years, but I'd love for you, can you just give here's what Precursor is and does, and what they focus on?
Yeah, definitely. So Precursor is a pre-seed and seed stage venture fund. And for someone who doesn't know what those things mean, it means different things for different funds. But for us, when we say pre-seed, we mean as early as the idea stage. And so this is something we've been doing the last 10 years. When we talk to founders, we never will tell them, you're too early for us or come back later. So if it's just you and your idea and nothing else, you're a good fit for Precursor. Of course, we also invest in seeds, so if you have some traction, some progress, that's also a good fit. But that's the bread and butter of what we focus on. We've been doing it for 10 years. We invest in, I guess, about 500 companies to date, and we're generalists. So whether you're building software or consumer or enterprise or hardware, we look at everything. So it's really a really wide range in terms of what we invest in. So we really over-index on who the founder is and why is this market so urgent to build in it. And so I'd say, with every decision we think about, it's 60% about why do we want to invest in this founder, and then 40% on, okay, we know why we want to invest in this founder. Are we just as excited as they are about the idea? And so, yeah, that's something we've been doing for the last 10 years, and it's still different every single time. We still see new and exciting companies like Lore every day.
As an investor in Precursor, how is it structured? Like, is every person... So, and I should actually, this is a good opportunity to also shout out Aliyah Lakhani, who's a VC member of Brown Girl Angels. But I was so curious, kind of, do you look at everything, or do you focus, and is there kind of specializations within the firm?
Yeah.
I'm sure someone listening is going, whoa, so you look at all this deal flow, but how can you be good at deciding on everything of everything? So could you
it's a great question. It's very common. We're 5 investors, and so all 5 of us honestly are not sector specific. We are all generalists. We are all very comfortable, and regardless what sector it is. We have some people who have a lot of interest or background in specific spaces. So if you know Aliyah, she has a huge background in healthcare, but she is still looking across the board in terms of what she invests in. And honestly, we just believe even, if it's such wide-ranging ideas, you can get to the meat of what someone is building and how urgent the problem is, regardless of what the actual idea is. And so, after every first call, I am asking myself these questions. I'm asking, is it urgent? Is it a hair on fire problem? Is it, does the founder have a unique insight, and are they passionate to keep solving this even when it gets hard? And not only that, can they inspire a team of 10, 50, 100 people, if we get to it, to keep solving that problem as well? And, how thoughtful are they about the long-term vision, the business model, every move they make, the go-to-market plan? And those things are transferable regardless if you are building a deep tech robotics company for healthcare and hospitals, or if you're building a consumer software platform like Lore. And so that's something, it takes time to learn. I did not come from the venture space, and I was actually very sector specific before this. I used to cover semiconductor stocks. And to go from something as niche and specific as semiconductors to becoming a generalist, it did take time. But you do this for a while, and you meet so many people, and you start to see when they get, that sparkle in their eye, and it's regardless of what kind of idea they're working on. If let's say you're on a call and they never get that sparkle, and this really isn't something they're passionate about, then we can have a conversation of, why are you building this? And maybe there's something else that you are more passionate about. We are also very notorious of, investing in first-time founders as well. And so we need to be open of, regardless of what space they're investing in, because otherwise we're just going to pigeonhole ourselves and only seeing the same type of person, same type of idea every single time. So it does take time. It takes probably, at least 500 founder calls before you get comfortable understanding, like, how do I look at these two very, very different business models? But overall, when you get deep into it, you're kind of assessing the same 3, 4, top 5 things on your checklist.
I mean, I have so many questions to jump off on how that must changed you as a person and your ability to read people. Like, there's, we're all bleeding edges of our work informing how we live and how we change and mold and evolve as a person. But Zehra, let's take it way back, because you've been doing cool shit since day. That's what I wanted to say. And let's take it way back to Hong Kong, and where you started a company that was like Forever 21 in Hong Kong. And then you end up having a Stan account in One Direction. Like, is there something about being a young woman with ideas and activating on those ideas that you can talk to, like, because this is a time we're in right now where young women they come up with an idea so neat. Like, what is it about that time in life that makes young women say, yep, I have an idea, I want to do it? And what made you do that when you started the company that you did?
Yeah, happy to. So that company, I think, is so kind of emblematic of me just being obsessed with like trends and identifying them. And I could go back even earlier to when I was like in third grade in this like school in Hong Kong. I started like a really aggressive barter system with like broken pencil tips, and it got really bad because people were like trading Tamagotchis, and then eventually it got to like Nintendo DSs with like 1,000 pencil tips. So I'm that type of kind of like kid. I'm like very good at kind of like creating markets, creating ecosystems, and I think like influencing, if I'm just going to be very candid. And I think that's kind of stayed with me. Glow, which was the name of the clothing company, was kind of born out of like, this was like the early 2010s, and social media hadn't really like fully progressed into the creator economy yet. And it was the very like beginnings of influencers, and this was the first time really in the world that like us as teens and kids in Hong Kong had like immediate access to what was trendy in America via like social media, YouTube, of course, Tumblr. Tumblr is a really big part in a lot of this. And so I think I just kind of identified there's this like overwhelming demand for like the type of clothing that we're seeing on Tumblr, we're seeing on Instagram. There are no clothing stores like brick and mortar or just like online stores that were selling that clothing to Hong Kong. And so I was kind of thinking about it more from like the opportunity in our school, the opportunity in Hong Kong, and even more so, like, this is again ridiculous, but people who would go to America and then come back to Hong Kong would be selling like Bath and Body Works hand sanitizers for like a 10-15x markup. It was really ridiculous. And so I think I knew there was a lot of willingness to pay for things that were trendy in America in Hong Kong. And this was like 2011, 2012. So I was really, really young. And it was like, okay, let's try and do one collection and kind of see how it pans out. And so really the only costs or like the investment that my parents like were very generous to kind of support us with was just like developing the clothing itself. And then after that, this was also very early in the days of Shopify, where like no one really knew what Shopify was. And my sister and I, she's 2 years younger than me, so it's more impressive that she was involved with this. She and I just set up a Shopify store, and our distribution was entirely Instagram and Tumblr, and we just went very aggressive in those channels. We then identified like influencers based in like New York, LA that we loved, and this was the time when you could just send them a shirt and they would post it for free, and the orders started piling in from even America, which was hilarious because we were just responding to like the demand that we saw on the like American clothing side of things. I think when you're a child, you never feel like you're in a system where like the world could fail you or fails you. Like I never even just thought about like I'm a young girl starting a business. I just saw it as like I've loved fashion my whole life. There's this trend. I created a barter system when I was 8 years old. Like I feel like I could do this. And I think that type of like courage and conviction that you have when you're a child is honestly like some of it is just like innocence, and you're gated from the real world. And I'll say I was definitely braver back then than I am now. I think just like reflecting on everything and how stuff panned out. But that was like a really big kind of like, I had a lot of conviction in like the perspective that I had in the ecosystem, and exactly also knew like there is latent demand, there's a way for us to supply for it, and we knew that it would sell. I think that was the biggest thing. Like we just almost had guaranteed that we were taking pre-orders within our school with other schools in Hong Kong, and so it started just like we knew it would snowball. And so I think it's almost like the benefits of like encouraging children when they have these ideas to like go at them, like prove something out and to like create and execute, I think is honestly like something that I hope to do in the future when I have kids. Just like if there's anything they're obsessed with, like go after it, prove it out. If you fall down, get back up and just be resilient. I think that was like the biggest thing that I learned from that experience.
Was sharing this idea with your parents your first pitch of life?
Yeah, like it's funny because my sister, she had pitched us getting like a ragdoll cat, which we ended up not getting, and she made like a 100 slide deck, and then we ended up getting this cat when I was leaving for college. So it was like a 10-year process for her into converting them. But yeah, we made like a presentation on Keynote and pitched it to our parents, and we speak Mandarin, so we went to the manufacturers. They had outposts like in Guangzhou and Shenzhen, and we would just like barter with them in terms of getting stuff produced, and we knew the cost of everything. So that was like my first pitch, yes, ever really, was to my parents with this keynote presentation.
This story dovetails so well into what I think, Marina, is part of the gate-kept conversations that happen for a VC to say, yeah, I'll take the next meeting. Was this storytelling of building this company, Zehra, like, was that part of what you shared? And is that something that Marina, is that, do people share those kinds of stories when they're and how important is that? Because there's so much noise, and put that stuff about the founder at the end of the deck. Some are like, put it right at the front. People need to hear. And as you were saying, you're talking to people when they just have an idea and maybe no company. So how important is this kind of storytelling that Zehra just shared? And kind of talk to us about that, and then kind of please take us into, and then how the investment in Lore came to be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do think storytelling is really important. I think that there's a running joke around pre-seed venture. You know, they invest on vibes. If you could tell a story well in 30 minutes, then they're probably going to invest. And I think that's a wrong way to look at it. I look at it as, if you can pitch to me, a stranger who doesn't know much about your business, and get me excited, and not only excited, but believe in the vision that you're telling, that's a huge, huge green flag. And it not only speaks to, how you'll raise money in future rounds down the line, but also how will you convince someone to join your team that you want to hire? How do you bring on customers? And how do you pitch customers to get them excited and make this, again, something urgent on their top of their mind? And so that's why storytelling is really, really important. Something I do for every company, I ask what sounds like basic questions that you could probably get in the pitch deck before the call. I always tell people, start from the beginning. I have the pitch deck, but I still want to hear the beginning, who you are, how did you think of this idea, how did you meet your co-founder if you have one, and how did you think of the idea, and then where is it now, what do you see it looking like? And yes, a lot of that could be in the deck. And same when I eventually ask, tell me about your competition, tell me about your business model. Like, these things may sound repetitive, but it says a lot to me of how much do you know your market that you can speak to it without a pitch deck and without deferring to something else. I need to know how comfortable you are. And if, again, you can tell that story that it makes me comfortable. And I loved what Zehra said earlier of, describing it to an auntie and making sure they understand it is really crucial. And I always describe it as, if you are building something really complex, let's say like it's something in deep tech or cybersecurity, and you can explain it to me like I'm a 10-year-old, that I walk away from that conversation and I am super excited and I can tell my team about it, that says volumes that I could explain to someone else now. And that's a huge part of, I think, how founders should think when they pitch VCs, because that VC that you are pitching to will inevitably have to talk about your company to the rest of their team without you in the room, and have to get them excited just as you were on the first call. And so storytelling is extremely important, and it is more than just vibes.
I was asking Ali Roghani, who we had on the podcast from First Harmonic from XYC, about how important is intuition in this process. So what do you think? How important is it?
I think at pre-seed, it honestly is extremely important, especially if you're going off of, something where it is very, very little traction to almost none at all. You do just have to trust your gut. Something that translated really well from my past experience is when I was in equity research, I had to be comfortable, saying if someone should buy or sell a stock. And not only were you told to, make an opinion, you were encouraged to go against consensus. To say something on consensus, you might as well just not be talking. And so you really, really were encouraged. And that's something that translated extremely well when I switched into venture, is that I didn't really care what other people think. I don't really care if there's someone else in the round already and what fund it is. That's not really going to sway me, especially at this early stage, because it is so, so subjective that, if someone sends me a company that they're looking at, that they really, really like the founder, but they couldn't get excited for whatever XYZ reason, I will still always take the call, because I know that whatever XYZ reason that was for you was subjective, and I might come away with something else. And I do think that when you get into later stages, it's different. There's more, you have to do more than gut instinct. There's just, there are numbers that you will use as evidence of how they are performing. But at early stage, when there really isn't numbers that you can put your whole trust into, that's when it's just, do you believe in this? Are you walking away even excited because you're also taking 20 other calls that week? And so, if someone else was able to get you excited, you're just not going to focus on another one that, it might have been a solid idea, a solid person, There's probably almost no reason to say no, but there was just something else that you saw this week that really, really got you excited, that you want to spend more time on, that you don't mind writing a long memo about and sharing with your partners and defending it to your partners. And so that's kind of the way you have to think about it. It is gut instinct, but it's also just like, I only have a limited amount of time and resources. So when I walk away from this call, which of the 20 companies I saw this week will I want to really dig into more?
Well, that is the perfect setup then for how did Lore and Precursor come to be?
So I'll start in saying that Lore was something I was really thinking about, but it didn't have the name yet, towards like the tail end of me being a VC. And it was largely because like I learned through being an investor, this is how you come up with like your investment thesis. This is like my MO for consumer AI. I want to invest in people who are building like new interfaces for exploration that are gamified, that are focused on subjectivity. If like ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity are all going to take the objective side of Google, like who's owning the whimsical, fun parts of the internet that made the internet what it is? So I set the scene to basically say that. I then immediately thought in my head, once a couple months passed and I had come down to like, I want to found this company, who are the two firms that I really want to pitch this to, and really became the only two VC firms that I pitched in our pre-seed round. And the first was Village Global, and was largely because I had told Max, who was one of my friends, about Lore, and then literally the next day I pinged Marina. And so this is also coming from me having been a VC, where I was thinking about like, who are my founder friends that have raised from so many different pre-seed funds, so many different first investors that had the best experience, the best relationship, the most like supportive funds. And it was really like those two that came up over and over and over and over and over again. I will say Precursor perhaps even more than Village Global, just because they've been doing it for so long. And so that was like December of 2024, and I hadn't left my VC job yet. I hadn't incorporated the company. And so then I think it takes us to like February of 2025, which is when we had like our IRL meeting on the Upper West Side. And I was telling Marina, I've left my job. This is what I'm doing. This is Lore. This is everything. And I'm gonna let Marina kind of speak to this too. But I didn't even realize we've known each other a while, and I didn't realize we had this in common on the like being obsessed with movies, and like going to the cinema and actually having that as like a practice. And that ended up being the way that you understood Lore instantly. And so I will pass it along to you. But they were like the first two people that I thought of, and then they basically became our pre-seed investors.
We'd known each other for almost a year before that. But when she was describing it, I was like, do you know that I go to the movies every week? Did you already know that? Or how did we get to this? And we just realized at the time, like, we both have really strong fandoms. And for me, it is going to AMC and going to movies, and I care about the Oscars. Like, that is something that really, really resonated with me. But that alone, that got me excited, of course. But the other part of it is that Zehra and I have talked before about, she was a founder before, and, going back to founder life. And, when she came to me with this idea, I already knew her interest in her fandoms. And so that was something that when she was pitching this, like, this isn't just like an idea you thought of in a night, and, AI makes it super easy now for anyone to think of an idea and create something. No, this is something that she's cared about and thought about for a really, really long time. And so that first meeting, or that first coffee shop where we just talked about her idea for Lore, that was, the excitement, the obvious excitement that I got after that meeting. And then afterwards, I took some time, because you want to ground yourself a little bit. They're very compelling founders you talk to who are great storytellers, that you don't just want to sometimes invest right on the spot, because you need to ground yourself up after the excitement and just make sure you understand the full idea. And so when I left, I then texted Zehra and I said, I need to know your plans for like the business model. I need to see like, what is your vision of what this looks like? What is the small mechanics that, you have to talk about and you have to think about that's more in the short term? And she then sent me this really, really long memo with all of these things and all of this already thought out. And I read it and I knew exactly, like, this, again, like, it's not something she thought of on the whim. It's also, she's being extremely thoughtful, especially when you build something that's consumer facing. You care a lot about, usage is great, but it's easy to get free usage, especially a group like a Fandom group where they just are obsessed with everything, all their hobbies and all their interests. If you give them a place to vocalize that, they're going to have intense usage, but how will you monetize it? And she had this long thing about partnerships and the business model. I was like, this is perfect. And yeah, for me, that's what's really exciting. And honestly, it's interesting, and I think about this a lot of, I've only been in the space in venture for 5 years, the phone's been around for 10 years, so we have a little bit more, points to go off of to build our pattern recognition. But honestly, we see about 1,000 or more pitch decks every year. We invest in less than 1%. Honestly, it's probably like 5,000. And it's pretty rare to pitch me an idea that I haven't seen before. That doesn't mean I won't get excited, but it's just, that alone is pretty rare, that I've seen a lot of similar ideas. And when Zehra mentioned lore and fandoms, I was like, this feels like almost beautifully simple, and somehow I haven't been pitched this. Why is no one thinking about fandoms? That's an intense fan base. You see it for sports. There's all these consumer apps, and there's all these prediction markets now. There's so much for sports because people who are fans of sports think about it regularly, not once every 2 weeks. They're thinking about it every single day. And that's why it's almost an easy customer base to go off of, because if you pitch them, or give them a consumer app, and let's say the app fails one day, they're freaking out and they're angry, and they're going to let you know that they're angry that the app is down. And I was like, there's another fandom outside of sports that's more in the creative world, the movies, the video games that no one is really tapping. And so when Zehra pitched me that, I was like, why has no one thought of this before?
Marina, that was so insightful. And I think to so many founders listening, there's so many things to pick up on. But at the same time, we live in an age where people are like, oh, but Zehra was a VC. She was able to just call Marina, or she already knew how to write a memo. So I want to pretend to be that person. And I'm going to just pick up and just kind of repeat back some things that I feel like I've heard. If I was not a VC, if I was as the kind of founder that you say you see, like, have an idea. I'm hearing really be able to tell the story of what you're building to someone who doesn't know your vertical, to someone who doesn't just even understand the startup ecosystem, in a way where they can actually go repeat it. I'm hearing that. So this is great storytelling. And I'm also hearing, but then show us how you're going to make some money. Like, actually really understand, and not just you, the founder, building this, but you, the founder, building this in the context of what already exists and what's in the ecosystem, but go real deep on that. That's the second thing I'm hearing. The third thing I'm hearing is what Zehra said, which is, don't just spray and pray, VC, angel, everybody. Know who you're talking to and why specifically those people. Smart capital, smart pitching, targeted lists, which I feel is a general thing for sales and just generally pitching. But I just want to reiterate that. That's the other thing. And Zehra, in the story that you've said, what have I missed?
I think the one thing I would kind of add, or I guess I'm more or less like doubling down on, like, what the experience that I had with Marina, and that we kind of had this like shared understanding of like fandom and obsession, and like, how has no one built this, and like, it's kind of crazy. It was almost completely the opposite with like Max at Village Global, because he is like not a consumer person. He was for the most part, even when I was like contextualizing lore, he was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, when I was going into like the fandom stuff and the Tumblr stuff, because that's just not his world. He obviously understands how it works, but so I'll even like kind of like capitulate a little bit that I was also talking to people who were not like fandom pilled, not super consumer pilled, not like necessarily super in the know of this ecosystem. And I think like with Max, his biggest reason for wanting to invest in lore is kind of what Marina had said, where it is at the end of the day, and this is I think just the reality of it, especially at pre-seed, the conviction he had was so rooted in me and the amount of time that I'd spent thinking about the space, interacting with all of the software and the thoughtfulness that went into it. And then eventually, of course, I was able to like find nuggets of different things that the different people at Village Global were obsessed with and contextualize it for them, whether that's Taylor Swift, Lord of the Rings, their favorite sports team, ancient Egypt, the Roman Empire, and just like contextualize their current experience and going down the rabbit hole. But I'd say also like, I always tell my founder friends that it's also kind of like, especially at pre-seed, and this is more just like broadly speaking, you have to be so resilient and persistent. I'll also like, to your opening comment on like how I was a VC, I'm very lucky that I was one, because I'm like a solo non-technical founder, and all of our VCs really were investing off of that insanely detailed memo I wrote, but lore was like an idea at that point. There really wasn't anything. We didn't even have a brand. We didn't have a logo. And so I will totally like admit that was like a really big part of it. But I think it was also because I had been so consistently thinking about consumer and building my own brand how much time I'd spent building in consumer on the operator side, and then eventually becoming a VC because I had spent so much time as an operator, and kind of the through line being that I was obsessed with consumer for as long as I have been. But I think it's really just like a matter of persistence and resilience, and just continuing to take the meeting, not getting bogged down if someone doesn't get it, if they don't understand it, not allowing every no to shift your vision. And I think some of my founder friends deal with this. It's very hard. It is like a mental game, but every no and every feedback they get, they start to doubt themselves and second guess what it is that they're doing. And you literally cannot allow that to happen at pre-seed. Like, you need to have so much conviction in yourself and your ability to have thought through this, and you need to find some sort of system to deal with the no's. And I think that's the biggest thing I tell all my founder friends. You need to have a healthy outlet, especially at pre-seed, which is super important for dealing with the amount of no's that you're going to get. And you cannot let people's feedback, because you're going to get so many different opinions. You have to be so steadfast in your POV, you as the founder behind this, the market, the amount that you've thought about it, and just know that it is like a game of statistics. Like, you're going to do a huge amount of conversations, and eventually there will be someone who fully understands it, wants to back you, but it is kind of like, it is a volume play at the end of the day. And I think that that's like really important to remember at pre-seed. You just have to be so resilient and persistent.
We know, but we need to hear it, and need to hear it often, because, you know, there could be somebody hearing it who's in the know today. And yeah, you sometimes just need someone to be like, and keep going, and keep going. We've just kind of at different points touched upon this, and I want to make sure we have time to talk about this, which is both of your backgrounds and how you came into these worlds. You came from art history and studying art history, and you've talked about how that dovetails so well into these various aspects of your life. And then Marina, you touched upon this semiconductor research into this. So I'd love for you guys pick who goes first, but I'd love for each of you to just give us a little bit more, because we do have so many young women who want to get into VC, who are also interested in they hear it's not a linear path, they hear all these things, but, you know, it helps to hear the stories.
So definitely not a conventional path for VC. I think most often you see, if you're going into VC, maybe you were a founder first, or, you know, maybe you got your MBA and then you pivoted in, or you went to investment banking or consulting. I didn't have any of that. So I was doing equity research, and I really liked semiconductors, more so because of what I had to learn to understand semis. And, you know, if you're learning about semis, you have to learn about all their different end customers. So not only did I have to keep track of all the earnings calls for my 20 chip makers, I had to keep track of what was happening in retail tech and computer vision. I had to keep track of what was happening in energy and data centers. I had to keep track of what was happening in electric vehicles. I had to keep track of gaming and what was happening with the newest computer that was coming out. I had to keep track of all of that. And I loved that. I loved knowing about how semis is the forefront and the first piece of technology that has to change for any other piece of tech to change. And so it really kept me in the know. So I love that. I knew I wanted to keep researching emerging tech. What I didn't honestly love was the stock side of things. I felt like it was extremely late stage. I didn't know, you know, if I'm spending years researching these companies, am I really moving the needle on the stock price? Probably not. So how can I do something where if I'm going to spend time with a company for years, it's going to feel like at least I'm helping, at least there's a small impact there. And so that was my first thought of switching into something early stage and what pre-seed and seed stage meant. And once I nailed that down and I realized I want to go early, but I don't just want to go early. I want to do a full 180. Let's go from stocks to pre-seed idea stage. Well, if we're doing a 180, let's go from semiconductor specific to a full generalist, so I can keep learning about all those different end customers and areas. And so that was my first thought, my first time actually experiencing venture. I will say, just for anyone who is looking to make the pivot, maybe it's not a conventional path, I did apply cold to Precursor, and you know, I went through the interview process. I didn't know anyone. I was very outside of the network, and it worked out. And that alone sounds simple. That was probably 2 years of interviews. I think a lot of venture doesn't really disclose when they're hiring. You're not going to see it on their website. Maybe you'll see it on Twitter or LinkedIn, maybe, but otherwise it's just, you know, word of mouth of who's hiring and then funneling through any candidates they know. So it really took a while to figure out how to get in the know, how to be part of like these events that are happening in New York, in San Francisco. And it took a while that you kind of had to, this is very basic advice, but do the job before you had the job. I would start to go to pitch events when I saw them online and just show up at random demo days. And I would just like sit there in the audience and listen to these 5 pitches and hear what the panelists had to say, what kind of questions they were asking, take note, but then also ask myself, would I have invested in that company? Would I have invested in that company? Write it down. So that I was ready when the time actually came, and started writing memos and things like that. So doing the job actually really, really is important. That I could, when I was finally doing interviews, it's a lot of that. It's case studies. Why would you invest in this company? Write me a memo about why. And so I was more prepared. But having equity research as a background did help me think about things of, a lot of soft skills. Like maybe I'm not looking at financial statements anymore, but I'm, like I said earlier, I know how to ask the right questions when you only have 30 minutes to talk to a company. I know how to read between the lines of what someone is saying and what they're not saying in those questions that I'm asking. I know how to research something extremely complex because I was able to do it with semiconductors, which is a super complex niche industry. I'm now not afraid if I'm talking to a biotech company or to a CPG brand. And I'm able to form an opinion and be against consensus and be extremely okay with that if I am, and not need to hear about what anyone else is thinking about the company.
If I could just applaud at the end, just so much there. It sounds like such a simple sentence, but you were like, hey, I want to do a complete 180 and go into something different. But that was not just a fleeting thought. You doubled down on that, and then 2 years of interviews later. Exactly. This is the stuff people need to hear.
It's interesting because of the first company I'd founded, and then also we didn't talk about it, but the whole Tumblr, Twitter obsession I had online. And also BuzzFeed. I had such a hyper fixation on being in New York, working at startups, because Tumblr and BuzzFeed were based in New York. And I think a huge part of my motivation into coming to New York was really just that. I wanted to find founders that were basically the equivalent of the founders at Tumblr and BuzzFeed, and basically literally annoy them until they gave me something to do. Because I also recognized I was an operator, but I just wanted to learn all the commonalities between different consumer startups. So I was one of the first college interns for Bumble's ambassador program that they did a decade ago. Columbia was one of the first campuses that they launched that on. And then I was the first intern at Kofi Beauty before they had launched into Sephora, and I learned a lot. Series A cat food company Smalls, I did a quarter-long project just changing colors on their website to understand how that affected average order value. I worked at Alinea and Best. I was their first intern too, and now they've blown up. They're a Series A. So I just was it was funny because I realized now in hindsight, I was also kind of putting a VC hat on because I was choosing which companies I had the most faith in. And out of the 14 that I did something for in the 4 years I was at Columbia, 9 of them still exist, which is a pretty good yield. I think after when I think about the VC life cycle. And so that was just kind of let me learn everything and let me just get my bearings as quickly as I can. And to your point, I was also studying art history, and I think art history was also a really good warm-up into VC, because the whole point of art history is you look at these paintings, sometimes old, sometimes new, and you assess what everyone has said about them, and people tear apart the painting, put it together, put their opinion on it, and you get to review all of that, and yet somehow looking at the exact same objective piece of art, you come to a new conclusion and a new observation, a new way of looking at it. That's the whole point of art history. And so the fact that I could spend paragraphs dissecting one brushstroke was my favorite thing in the world, because there's so many, it's so subjective. There's so many different ways and so many different people who can look at a piece of art and think about it in a million different ways. I think the same goes to any problem in our world that can then be translated into a startup, and the different ways that you decide to tackle it and approach it and say, okay, here are all the startups that came before us, here's what they did wrong, or here's where my opinion differs. And that's the same thing you do with other art historians when you're coming up with a new perspective of looking at a work of art. And so then that took me into working, one of the startups I worked at my junior year throughout my senior year, I joined full-time, and that was Republic. I think at the time that I had joined, they were still pre-seed, and then by the time I had left, they had done a 170 million Series B. It was the craziest 3.5 years of just learning, and the clients that we worked with, or that I worked with in the sales and partnerships and then eventually growth teams, were startup founders. So I was just talking to founders all day, every day, which is kind of to Marina's point, I was almost unintentionally doing the VC job before actually being in it. And so then I started angel investing, and I started writing my newsletter, and I started just posting on Twitter and LinkedIn, and stuff kind of slowly snowballed. And then Headline Ventures reached out to me to be a scout for them. I think it was summer of 2023. And then after a couple months, they were who is this person who is aggregating all these lists of different consumer startups in New York? And I was constantly tweeting them and putting them like in public and everything, and then that eventually converted to me joining their team full time. They had just closed, I think it was their 8th early stage fund, just dedicated to like pre-seed through Series A. I was their New York City consumer investor, and my whole like MO was exactly what I've been doing the past like 7-8 years at that point, just like be in consumer tech in VC, find all the deals, but this time I was doing it from the perspective of an investor. And so I think like even to Marina's point, like I would never like overtly admit that I was doing all this to become a VC, because I don't think that was the case, but it was kind of like an underlying thing where I was like unintentionally just like more closely aligning myself to the role of what a VC would do, whether that was like working at a startup and being there from pre-seed through Series B, or the fact that everyone I was talking to all day every day were startup founders, and then that kind of translated into angel investing. And it was like being in the VC ecosystem and kind of oscillating around it before I finally was welcomed in, for lack of better words. And that I like, even though I was a VC only for like a year and a half, I think it was such a critical opportunity for me, because yeah, like putting the VC hat on, understanding what happens behind closed doors after being at startups that raised 300 million or raised no money, and knowing that every single founder was constantly stressed about where the next money was going to be coming from, I finally got to understand more about like how they arrive at those decisions. And I don't think I would have been able to like formulate lore in my head had I not been a VC and actually like been pushed to think about what are the opportunities that exist in our world to create better like consumer experiences. And so I really actually like, I'm so glad I was a VC, because lore is so like the combination of my personal life and my professional life, and this is so like me living in my truth and building this company, but I would not have arrived to this point had I not been a VC. So I'm very grateful for my experience having been a VC. I think it was more just like, I didn't know it at the time, but that was like an experience I needed to go through in order to actually like formulate lore and have so many things go right on like consumer AI, in being able to understand how to like put together a memo and start thinking about like what does this long-term opportunity look like to build this company.
You know, there's so many common dots here in both of your personal journey around, well, first of all, the continued emphasis that you both have always kept on critically being, just critical thinking, and that emphasis on how important that is to everything that you're doing. And that is the first thing that are so common between you two. But also the second thing that I think I said it a different way, but I just want to come back to it because I'm just so taken by it, is you exemplify the role that you want to be, but you're not doing it, as you said, from this like, ooh, if I do this and I attend this many pitches in New York, okay, so I think I'm going to be able to in the interview, Marina, and then tell them I do. And like it's just the natural flow of wanting to do something so badly that you are living what you want to be without knowing the outcome, but just knowing that, well, that's what I want to do now. And then eventually all the dots connect. And I'm just so taken by that, because I don't know, sometimes I feel like it's a lot of, okay, I did a little bit of this, now I want this. It's we're in such an instant gratification society, but real TLDR of that is y'all put in the work. That's it. That's no greater sentence is needed. And I think also have so much in common is you care about community. I mean, Zehra, I don't know how we made it this far to not talk about your insane Beehive newsletter that you built as part of this. And what were the numbers? Like, share it, like how strong as far as the number of subscribers and just that community that you built as part of this.
I'll start like at the beginning. Like in 2019, I sent my first edition. It was just through Gmail. And I think it was like 35 people. It was like the founders I'd interned for, and then a couple of my friends at Columbia that were obsessed with like VC startup stuff. I got to my first 10,000 subscribers in 2021, which was kind of like, okay, I had done the like startup stuff, I had more to say, and that was still me doing it in a very like, I think this was like MailChimp. It was not as sophisticated as what ended up being on Beehive, which I think I got onto like early 2023 or 2022, and then Beehive and like hosting events and being at Republic is kind of what snowballed. And so that year, 2023, we grew to like 60,000 subscribers, and then it was in the time of me being a VC, and then I like haven't sent really that many editions out since. being at Lore, but that's going to change starting this week. But yeah, the final number now is like 80 something thousand, and I need to send more out. Like 2024, I sent like 55 editions out, and then last year I was very heads down founder mode, so I only sent like 4, and I think it's like 3 months as a founder, 6 months as a founder, 9 months as a founder, and then it was like Lore is out of stealth. So now I'm doing my like 12 months as a founder and like 1 year after going down the rabbit hole of Lore. But the Z-list is no longer public, so I'm actually not like I'm not posting the editions on our website anymore. You have to be subscribed if you want to read. If you want to read all my yapping.
That makes sense. And I mean, yapping. This is especially timely because, as I think I've mentioned to you offline, Zehra, the Z-list was the inspiration for the Brown Girls Money Moves newsletter. In fact, I clicked on to Beehive off of your newsletter, and it's especially timely because this is our 1 year anniversary of Brown Girls Money Moves. Yeah, and so it is hearing. Yeah, you want to hear from the people who are like, it was a slog at first, and this with a number, and it's what everyone says. It's like the slog is in those first couple of thousand, and then it's like it's the hockey stick. I want to make sure we actually talk about the business model. We touched upon it a little. And I mean, Marina, you said like, hey, I want to know exactly, that sounds great, but like, how are y'all making money? That's the way I simply say it. Like, can you touch a bit upon that? So I believe you've raised over 1M in seed funding.
Really high level, Lore has been and will always be like a consumer platform. And so a lot of what I wrote in that memo focuses so much on like the consumer experience, and I think it was really based on the fact that like when you're a kid and you're obsessed with something, you kind of rely on your parents to like buy the merchandise for you and the toys and the stuff that you're obsessed with. And obviously like you're not earning when you're a child, and so you're kind of reliant on like your parents for all of those experiences. I think the opportunity that I saw with Lore on the consumer side of things was, I think, twofold. The first is there's so much friction in just staying obsessed with the stuff that brings you joy because the system hasn't changed in like decades. Like my favorite anecdote is when I was 9 years old, I would go on my laptop, open up like a million tabs after I watched Iron Man and like learn everything I could. Then like cut to 17 years later, I'm on my 37th Marvel movie in theaters, Fantastic Four, and I come home and I do the same thing. That also kind of comes with the same problem of like, I have more disposable income that I would be willing to spend on like premium Marvel experiences or merchandise, but I just am not given them because the context layer that knows that I've spent thousands of hours reading about Marvel, like that just doesn't exist. And so our business model is kind of divided into two things. I'll speak really high level since we're still kind of like hammering out the details, but on the consumer side of things, the first is that we really want to become like the one-stop shop for all fandom. One, like searching, yes, and rabbit holing and obsessing, but then two, having that kind of convert into like Lore, theoretically being able to execute on like purchasing experiences, tickets, movie tickets, like live shows, concerts on your behalf as like an agent. And then also Lore basically being like the place that you go to for everything that is like merchandise, from the like really like cheap like little trading card packs to like the really big ticket items, like you're a Star Wars super fan and you're spending thousands of dollars on like stuff that's coming straight off the set of the prequel movies in like in the 2000s. And then on the other side of it, Lore has always known, or I'd always known when I founded the company, that something had to be broken between the fan and the IP owner. I've never worked a day of my life in entertainment, so I was not necessarily privy to exactly why the breakdown between the two had happened. Village Global got me the chance to pitch Bob Iger, and that was kind of my foot in the door in understanding the world of entertainment through arguably like the best entertainment company in the world, Disney. And we realized very quickly there is an opportunity to not only just service the fan and the consumer, and like we want to create fandom infrastructure for you to obsess over the things that bring you joy, but then also like have transactions that can either be executed on your behalf or just like aggregate different things that we know you'll love based on the stuff that you're obsessed with without you really having to lift a finger. The other side of it is like Disney and all of these IP owners have the same problems that fans have. There is no place for us to search what does everyone think about Spider-Man. I mean, now there's Lore, but theoretically in the past there was no one place to go and ask questions about like Spider-Man and what's going to happen in the next movie. Disney and these IP owners have the same problems. And so we're spending a lot of time with IP owners kind of understanding like, what is your current process in understanding your customer? Like, how much insight do you have into it? Do you have people that are spending all their time just like screenshotting different Twitter threads, Reddit threads, falling down Tumblr rabbit holes? Do they have the like kind of chronically online brain rot brain that like I have and that the lore team has? And we've kind of realized really quickly they don't. And so I'm gonna keep the details of like the IP owner B2B stuff a little close to the chest, but there's a lot that we're working on there when it comes to just like basically making the almost like building the bridge between the fan and the IP owner again, because I always like use the anecdote. I think when movies and Hollywood first came into existence, it almost felt like there was no gap. The audience and like how much money they spent on tickets was exactly the information that the studio needed that this movie is doing well. And then with the advent of like not even just like the film critic industry, but like film critics and then the internet and every platform that people go to have these secondary and tertiary conversations, it's like not even like a little chasm. It honestly is kind of like they're on different continents with like a 5-day boat ride or something to get to one another. And I think that is a function of there just being no fan infrastructure. A lot of VCs invested in the creator economy in 2021. And that's obviously focused more on influencers, but influencers are no different than the IP owners that create like entertainment as we've always known for like decades. And I think the biggest issue with trying to create infrastructure for the IP owner or the creator is that like they can get the best infrastructure in the world and have the best systems for selling stuff. If the fan who has more disposable income, like the adult, does not have fandom infrastructure to actually engage with the things that they love, it does not matter how refined the like creator and IP experience, owner experience becomes, because they're not, the people who are buying don't have infrastructure for themselves. And so I think thematically that's the way we're thinking about like the business model and all of the opportunities we're going after, but we're still early, so we're still kind of testing and having conversations.
And I mean, this is where having, a partner along this journey like Marina, who's there to also say, yep, I believe in what you're building and believe in you as the founder, and how these ebbs and flows will go, and to have, I mean, especially, and Precursor, for those who don't know, I mean, you're a storied firm when it comes to, being and holding the founder's hand along the way and along the pivots and explorations. So thank you so much. We do always close out by paying it forward and doing the thing that we should do, creating community by shouting out the name of someone in your world that is a brown woman, a product, a business that they own that we can share with the world. So do close us out with that.
I'm gonna shout out Priyanka at Kulfi Beauty, because she was like, she taught me so much about just like navigating being a consumer founder, the realities of being a founder, how much comes down to like really being obsessed with your customer, and then also just having a lot of conviction in exactly what it is you're building and exactly your brand and your vision. And she was, I think she was honestly my favorite founder that I've ever worked for, because she just also gave me a lot of autonomy and like executing on a lot of the early stuff. And now they're just like absolutely demolishing in Sephora. They're doing so well, and I'm so proud of them. But she's the best. And I literally, actually, I'll show you right now. This is my Hello Kitty mug with my makeup by my desk. And I have a Kulfi. I'm wearing this right now. I have the Kulfi concealer, and then I also have, like, guys, this is actually insane. Like, I have my Kulfi eyeliner. I use all of this, by the way. That's why it's by my desk. I have the Kulfi like eyebrow gel, and then I have the Kulfi mascara. So I'm locked in with them. I'm obsessed.
I mean, truly, and also, wait, isn't it the only South Asian owned brand in Sephora? Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's just fatty. Marina, you go. Tell us.
I'll shout out another amazing founder of ours in our portfolio is Kavita Guy at Nectar. She is building a collaborative platform for professors at higher ed schools to be able to be there for their students in a more real-time and active way. So professors are able to create their own agent that is trained off of their course, is trained the way that the professor wants them to be trained, that when the student needs help now, and maybe they're too embarrassed to go to the professor, maybe it's 4 a.m. and they're working on the essay that's due in a couple hours, that they can actually chat with the agent that the professor has built themselves. And this was built by her own problems that she had while she was in school, of trying to find a more active way of learning, because just textbook learning didn't work for her, and eventually got to this idea, and it's doing well. They just recently announced their Series A, so super excited for her.
So thank you so much. Shout out, by the way, to Aliyah Lakhani. from Precursor, another woman who had this really interesting, as you mentioned, journey from healthcare into now being a journalist VC at Precursor. So it's so cool. And thank you for your time.
For more insights around angel investing, South Asian female founder stories, and belonging to a community that builds and funds brown girl businesses, join the conversation online at Brown Girl Angels. As always, thanks for listening to Brown Girls Money Moves with me, Bhargavi Varma.